Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How's everyone doing today? Alhamdulillah, I hope everyone's fine. Um, let's get going. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen. Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He speaks without sound, nor letter, nor language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light. He's not a spirit. He has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. Ameen. And as always, I ask Allah to grant me and to grant all of you sincere intentions. Thereafter, we're in this book, the 7 Hadeeth, obligatory knowledge that every Muslim must know. And we've reached a part where we're talking about Salat. The angel Jibreel alayhi salam asked Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Akhbirni anil Islam." He said, "Tell me about Islam." And our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned as one of the things that one should know about Islam is that we establish the Salat. And there are a number of bits of obligatory knowledge that every Muslim must know, which pertain to establishing the Salat. And one of the things we must know is how to be in a state of purification. How does the Muslim purify himself, which is something that must be done before entering into the Salat. Okay, so those of you who have a copy of the book, we are on page 10. Page 10 of the book. Last time we finished talking about wudu. Okay, we talked about the 4 things that cause minor hadith to come onto one's body. And we talked about the 6 integrals of wudu, which are required in order to lift minor hadith from one's body. And some things may have been a little unclear last time. So actually, before we continue, I'm going to say one other thing. And that is that there are many things that we do as part of wudu. Many things. More than just the 6 that are listed in this book. Okay? But some of the things that we do in wudu have different rulings according to the Sharia. Some of those things are obligations. They're what we call integrals. Some of those things are sunnahs, which means they're a part of the wudu, okay, and you get reward for it. But if you leave them out, the wudu would still be valid. The goal of the wudu, which is to lift minor hadith, would still happen even if the sunnahs were left out. Okay, the wudu also has things that are makruh, things where if you do them, they will impact the reward of your wudu, although they won't impact the validity of the wudu. And of course, wudu has invalidators. There are things where if you do them in the wudu, then minor hadith will come onto the body again, and you will not achieve your state of purification. There are also things in the wudu that interrupt the intention, and therefore the things that you do after that point will not count as part of the wudu. So the aspects of wudu have different rulings according to the Sharia. The subject of this book is for the Muslim to know the obligatory knowledge, to know what his obligations are. So this book does not go into all of the things that are sunnahs. Okay, wudu has many sunnahs. We're not going to talk about them here. Inshallah, after this book, when you take a book of fiqh, like Abu Shuja, for example, you will learn some of the sunnahs. For now, though, what's important is for you to learn the integrals, to learn the things that are actual obligations upon you. The things where if you don't do them, then your act itself did not happen. Okay, that's why we mentioned the 6 integrals of wudu last time. And one of the integrals of wudu If you're looking on page 10, it says, number 5, washing the feet up to and including the ankles, including whatever is on them. Then it says, or wiping on top of the hoofs with moist hands. Yeah, so one of the things we did not get to talk about last week is the wiping on the hoofs. Okay, if a person is making wudu after he has washed his face one time and washed his right hand and left hand one time each, and after he has wiped some part of his head, then he must either wash his feet from the tips of the toes to the top of the ankles, or if the conditions are met, then he can wipe on his hoofs. Hoofs are a type of footgear that you can wear on your feet. And if the conditions are met, then you will not have to wash your feet. Instead, as long as your hands are moist, you can simply wipe on top of the hoofs, and then you will be able to make a valid salat. So let's talk about the hoofs. There's a lot to say about hoofs. Okay, so inshallah, we need to get going. It says, section 3b1, wiping on hoofs. One's footgear counts as valid hoofs if they, okay, so what's going to follow here are a set of conditions. There are 5 conditions which must be met. If those conditions are not met, then you will not be able to wipe on your hoof as a substitute for washing your feet. Okay, if these 5 conditions are not met, then in order for your wudu to successfully lift minor hadith, you will have to wash your feet as part of the wudu, and you will not be able to wipe on the hoof. What are these 5 conditions? Number 1, it says, are pure. Okay, so your hoofs must be pure. Okay, this means that they have to be made out of a pure substance. Okay, so for example, if a person put on leather socks, but these leather socks are made out of pig leather, then he would not be able to wipe on the hoof as a substitute for washing his feet. Because in this case, the hoof is itself najis. It's najis filthy. It's not pure. It's an impure thing. Furthermore, even if your hoof were made of a pure substance, like say cow leather, even if your hoof were made from a pure substance, if it's contaminated by najis filth, also you will not be able to wipe on it. So for example, if you had leather socks made out of cow leather, but then a drop of wine landed on these leather socks, in this case, it will not be sufficient for you just to wipe on top of your hoof as a substitute for washing your feet. So that is the first condition. Okay, if you want to wipe on your hoofs, the first condition is that whatever this footgear is, it must be made of pure substances. Substances that are pure in and of themselves, but also not contaminated with something najis filthy. Number 2, it says that these hoofs cover the entire area that must be washed in wudu. So the second condition for your hoof to be valid, for you to wipe upon, is that the hoof covers the whole area that it's substituting for. Okay, wiping on hoofs is a substitute for what? For washing on your feet. And when you wash your feet, you have to wash from the tips of the toes all the way up to the top of the ankles. Okay, so this means that in order for your hoof to be valid, it will have to cover that entire area, your entire foot, including the ankles. Okay, when we say that it must cover this area, we mean it must cover it from all directions except up. So the hoof must cover the bottom of your foot, the sides of your foot, okay, the front and the back of your foot. But if there's an opening on top, and the opening for you to put your foot in, if some portion of what needs to be covered is visible through that opening that's on top, this is fine. Okay, because the opening, which is not covering part of the foot, this opening is from above. Okay, so that's okay. You need to cover the area from all directions except above. Number 3, the third condition for one's hoof to be valid is that they must prevent water from reaching what's beneath it. So whatever substance you're using as a hoof, it must have the quality that if water is dripped on it, okay, and I don't mean like a tiny drip, but at the same time, I don't mean like you're pouring from a cup either. I mean like a good amount of water, but dripping on it though. If water is dripped onto this hoof, then whatever is beneath the hoof will not get wet from it. This is a condition, okay? So we're saying that the hoof prevents water from going through it. Okay. So far, just to give you an idea of what might qualify as a hoof through the first three conditions, it's like imagine if someone had boots made out of glass. If someone had glass boots, well, glass is a pure substance. As long as it covers the area that needs to be covered except from above, then it covers the area. Notice I chose glass for a reason. When we say cover, we don't mean that it blocks people from seeing what's beneath it. Glass is see-through. People would still see your foot if you were wearing glass boots. Okay, so you know from this example that what we mean by covering isn't that it blocks it from view, but rather just that it surrounds the foot from all directions except above. And the third condition that we talked about so far is that it prevents water from going through it. And glass also has that property. If you dripped water on the top, the water would not go through the glass and reach your foot. Okay. Note that if you're wearing a type of hoof and you do the water test, if water does reach your foot beneath the hoof, the basic rule is that in that case, this hoof is not valid for you to wipe on. But if it turns out that the only reason why the water reached your foot was because the water dripped through one of the shoestring holes, like sometimes your boots or your leather socks or whatever your hoof is made of, sometimes it has laces for you to tie them up, and those laces go through little holes. If the only reason why the water reached your foot is because water slipped through one of those holes, then in this case we say that the hoof does prevent water from reaching the foot. Those little holes for the laces, those don't count. Okay. Number 4. Pay close attention when I say number 4. Okay. It says that these hoofs are able to be worn by the person for the duration of camp chores without damaging them. MashaAllah. So from this example, we know that actually if a person were wearing glass boots, then in most cases they would not actually qualify as a valid hoof, because most people would not be able to wear glass boots for the 30 minutes or so that it would take to take care of camp chores. What do I mean when I say camp chores? I mean that like in the past, before we had cars and things, when people were traveling, how would they often travel? They'd get an animal, like a donkey or a mule or a camel. They'd put all their stuff on it. They'd load up their luggage and all the supplies and stuff on the camel, and then they would walk. Like the person would walk, leading the camel who's carrying all of his stuff. Very often, that's how travel was done. Sometimes he'd have a second animal for him to ride on. But for the most part, that's how it was done. And so when the time came for them to rest, they would have to set up a camp. He would have to unload the animal. He would have to set up his tent or whatever he's going to be sleeping in. He would have to find water, tie the animal, feed the animal. He'd have to gather firewood. He'd have to start a fire. He'd have other things that need to be set up and put into place. These things involve a lot of walking around and take a certain amount of time. Okay, some of my sheikhs estimated 30 minutes. So in order for your hoof to be valid for you to wipe on, it needs to be something that you could wear out in like the real world, like on the ground, on the earth where there's rocks and sticks and dirt and things like that. You would need to walk on it for 30 minutes. Okay. without damaging the hoof. So what that means is if your foot gear is so small, like it's tight on your foot, it's so small that you can't bear walking in it for 30 minutes, then it's not valid for you to wipe on. Or if your hoof is so big that your foot is slipping out of it when you walk in it, such that part of what needs to be covered is coming out, then this is not going to be a valid hoof. If your hoof is made of such a weak material, if your hoof is made of such a weak material that if you walked around in it for 30 minutes, the material would be damaged. Okay, like if you were wearing gym socks or dress socks. Okay, if you walked in those outside on the dirt and rocks and sticks for 30 minutes, those socks would likely get a hole in them. And if they didn't get a hole in them, then you'd be able to see that they're already wearing out after 30 minutes of wear. So something like gym socks do not qualify as a valid hoof. Okay, in order to wipe on the hoof, it must meet the condition that you can wear it outside in the elements for the duration of camp chores, which again is estimated to be about 30 minutes, without damaging it. And the last condition that must be met in order for your hoof to be valid to wipe upon is that the hoofs were not put on until after you were in a state of complete purity. So what this means is you have to first have the minor Hadeeth as well as the major Hadeeth removed from your body before you put on the hoofs. It also means that you can't have najis filth on your foot, the area that's going to be covered by the hoof, and you already know it can't be on the hoof itself either. Okay, so these are the conditions for a valid hoof. Normally at this time, it's weird on the internet because I can't actually see any of you, but normally at this time, if I were teaching a live class with people, I would ask them this example, which we learned from our sheikhs, mashallah. Imagine that there's someone, he wants to wear his hoofs, but he knows he needs to be in a state of purification first. So what does he do? He goes and he makes wudu. He washes his face with an intention. He washes his right and left hands up to and including the elbows. He wipes a part of his head. And then what he does is he washes his right foot from the tips of the toes up to the top of the ankle. And after it's been washed and the minor Hadeeth has been lifted from the right foot, what does he do? He puts his right foot into a hoof. Then after that, he washes his left foot from the tip of the toes to the top of the ankle, thereby lifting minor Hadeeth from his left foot. And once that is done, he puts his left foot into the hoof. The question I would ask them is, when this person next has minor Hadeeth on his body and is in need to make wudu again, will he be able to wipe on his hoofs as a substitute for washing his feet? This is the question I would normally ask. And ordinarily, somebody says yes. Somebody says yes, he will be able to because he had wudu and there's no minor Hadeeth. But the answer to that question is no. The proper answer is no. This man will not be able to wipe on the hoofs as a substitute for making wudu. Why? Because when he put his right foot into the hoof, he was not yet in a state of complete purification. He put his right foot into the hoof before he washed his left foot. So his wudu was not yet complete. He was not yet completely free of minor Hadeeth when he put on the first hoof. And that is why he would not be able to wipe on his hoofs. It's a condition that he must be in a state of full purification before he puts his hoofs on. That's a condition. And in that example, he was not in a state of full purification before he put his right hoof on. His left hoof, on the other hand, he put that foot in while he had a state of full purification. Okay, so a person in this case, if a person finds himself in this case, what he can do is he can just take the right hoof off and then put it right back on again. And now he's put it on while in a state of complete purification. Okay. Let's continue. It says, one may wipe on the hoofs in lieu of washing the feet in wudu for a period of 72 hours from the time of Hadeeth, if the person is on a permissible long-distance journey. He may only wipe for 24 hours if he is a resident, a traveler, on a short journey, a traveler on a sinful journey, or if he, it says here, or if he began or ended his journey in the middle of the time period. But that's one of the sentences that I reworded in the new version, which is not yet available. But in the new version, the wording of it is, he may only wipe for 24 hours if he is a resident, a traveler on a short journey, a traveler on a sinful journey, or if he wiped as a resident, then traveled, or wiped as a traveler, then became a resident within the time period. So I reworded that sentence for it to be a bit more precise. But let's talk about this here. So after talking about the conditions for the hoofs, the next thing you need to know about hoofs is the duration. How long can you wipe? Right? In the Shafi'i school, we do not say that you can just keep wiping on the hoof for the rest of your life. Okay, no, you can wipe on a hoof for a certain period of time. And once that period of time is over, then the next time you need to make wudu, you will have to wash your feet. But how do you know how much time you have? Well, the answer in general is that, you can think of it that you have 24 hours and there's a special case where it's extended to 72, or you can think of it as, it being 72 hours. And if you're in any situation other than the one case of 72 hours, then it will be 24 hours. But you have a maximum amount of time. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the case where it's 72 hours. If the person is on a long distance journey, when we say a long distance journey, we mean that the distance from the town he's traveling from to the place that he intends to go to is a distance of 48 Islamic miles. That is what we mean. Now, according to the soundest opinion, that distance is about 82 or 83 of our miles. But there is another opinion which is literally 1/3 of that. And you're free to take either of the opinions, but my personal advice is to go with the strongest opinion. But one condition to have 72 hours is that the travel that you're on must be a long travel. When we say long travel, we mean so long that a person would be permitted to shorten their salats and combine their salats. That's what we mean. So to get the 72-hour duration, your travel must be long. Okay? And on top of that, your travel must be permissible. So if your travel itself was sinful, I'm going to say that again. If the travel itself was sinful, then you would not be able to wipe for 72 hours. Okay? I'm not talking about if a person commits a sin while traveling. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, the travel itself is the sin. If the travel itself is the sin, then that's when you would not be able to wipe for 72 hours. So what are some examples of that? Okay. First, I give you an example of sins that do not affect the duration. Okay. So let's say, for example, that a man was traveling from Baltimore to New York City. That's long travel. He's going there for purposes of business, which is permissible travel. Okay. But while he's traveling there, he looks at a woman's hair. That's haram. That's a sin. Okay, so he committed a sin while traveling. This sin will not stop him from wiping for 72 hours because the travel itself is permissible. He just happened to commit a sin while traveling. However, if the travel itself is a sin, how can that happen? How can the travel itself be a sin? Like if his purpose for traveling was to commit a sin. Say this person was going from Baltimore to New York with the intention to spend the weekend with his girlfriend. Someone he's not married to and has no right to be with, but he's going to go there and do haram things with her. Okay, if it's his intention to go do haram things with her, then the travel itself is haram, and he will not be allowed to wipe for 72 hours. What's another example of travel being haram? For the woman to travel by herself outside of her city without a mahram or the like, and without a religious excuse, then in that case, the travel would be haram travel, and she would not be able to wipe for 72 hours. This means, going back to the book, that in all the cases, other than this case where the person's on a permissible, long journey, in all the cases other than this case, the person can only wipe for a duration of 24 hours. And I mentioned those cases here. It says he may only wipe for 24 hours if he is a resident. That means he's not traveling. So if a person is a resident of whatever place he's currently in, this person will have just 24 hours to wipe. It says, or if he's a traveler on a short journey. So let's say a person is a traveler, but the journey was short. Say he's just going from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. That's a short distance. That's not long travel. This person will only have 24 hours to wipe. Or say he's a traveler on a long journey, but the journey itself is sinful. This person will only have 24 hours to wipe. Or if he changed status during the interval, and by change status, pay close attention. This is why I reworded it. Pay close attention. It's not the status change. It's the combination of status change and wiping that can limit a person to 24 hours. For example, if a person was a resident in a town, the first time he wiped on his hoof, then he has 24 hours only. If he begins a long distance travel after having wiped one time, the fact that he's now on a long distance travel is not going to extend his time to 72 hours. It's going to remain just 24 hours because he wiped as a resident. I'll give you another case. Let's say someone is on a long distance journey, and the first time that he wiped on the hoof is while he was on a long distance journey. So he had 72 hours. But before his 72 hours were finished, he reached his destination and he became a resident immediately. Like upon reaching his destination, he became a resident. Well, then in that case, he also will only have 24 hours to wipe. Even though he first wiped while being a traveler, his status changed. Okay, so if your status changes after wiping for the first time, that will cause you to have a limit of 24 hours. Inshallah, that's clear. Now, let's go back to the start of the paragraph. Read it again. It says, one may wipe on the hoofs in lieu of washing the feet in wudu. Okay, so what this means is the way you wipe on the hoof is you wipe right on top of it. You don't wipe on the bottom of it. You need to wipe on the top of it. Okay? The sunnah actually is to wipe on the top and bottom. That's the recommended method according to the Shafi'i school. But it's the top, the wiping on the top, that matters. The validity depends on wiping the top of the hoof. It says you do it in lieu of washing the feet in wudu. So you do this as a substitute for washing the feet in wudu. Okay, you should understand from this that wiping on the hoof is not a substitute in ghusl. And if you need to make ghusl, you cannot just wash the rest of your body and then wipe on your hoofs. Okay, wiping on hoofs is a special rukhsa which is given as a way of lightening things and making things easy for us. Okay, but this rukhsa only applies to wudu, not to ghusl. It says for a period of 72 hours, we talked about the duration already, from the time of Hadeeth. This is the part I really want to focus on here. From the time of Hadeeth. This is the answer to the question, when does your clock start? All right, when do you start counting your 24 hours or your 72 hours? Whatever your duration is, when does it actually start? Let's give an example. Let's say somebody wakes up at 6 a.m. Wakes up from his sleep. So if he was sleeping, then he has minor Hadeeth on his body. Okay? Let's say that at 6 o'clock, he makes wudu, a complete wudu, washing his feet and everything, a complete wudu. And once he's in a state of full purity, he puts on his hoofs. Okay, so we're going to say in this example, at 6 o'clock is when he put on his hoofs. Then let's say that 4 hours later, at 10 o'clock, he goes to the bathroom and minor Hadeeth comes on him again. So at 10 o'clock, he goes to the bathroom. 6 o'clock is when he put his hoof on. 10 o'clock is when he broke wudu, when he went to the bathroom. And then at 1 o'clock is when he wants to pray a dhuhr. And so at 1 o'clock is when he makes a wudu for dhuhr, and instead of washing his feet, he wipes on his hoof. So in this example, 6 o'clock is when he put his hoof on. 10 o'clock is when he went to the bathroom. 1 o'clock is when he actually wiped on his hoof. Which one of these three times is when his 24 hours starts? Or 72 hours if he's in that special case. Which one of these three times is when his clock starts? Does it start when he puts the hoof on? Does it start when he goes to the bathroom? Or does it start when he actually wipes? Well, what does it say in the book? It says, one may wipe on the hoofs in lieu of washing the feet in wudu for a period of 72 hours from the time of Hadeeth. And I remind you, Hadeeth is this thing that comes onto your body that you can't see, but because it's there, it blocks your salat from being valid. So the time that the clock starts is when the minor Hadeeth came on his body, which in this example was 10 o'clock. He put the hoof on at 6. He went to the bathroom at 10. He wiped on the hoof at 1. 10 o'clock is when his clock starts. So assuming he's a resident and only has 24 hours, it will be 10 o'clock the next day when he will have to remove his hoofs and wash his feet. But until then, every time that he makes wudu, he will be able to just wipe on the hoof instead of washing his feet. Okay. Inshallah, that's clear. The answer was not 6 a.m. The answer was 10 a.m. The answer was not 1 p.m. The answer was 10 a.m. because that is when the minor Hadeeth came on his body. That's when the clock starts. Question. Here's a question probably none of you even asked yourselves, but I'll ask it anyway. So he went to the bathroom at 10 o'clock. Let's say he had to urinate. Let's say this person drinks a whole lot of water. When he urinates, it takes him an entire 2 minutes for all of the urine to come out. Did his clock start when the urine first came out, or did his clock start when the urine was finished coming out? Okay, that's a 2-minute difference in terms of how much time he will have to wipe. Okay, if we say that he started peeing at 10, and if we say the clock starts when he begins peeing, then 10 o'clock the next day is when he'll have to take off his hoofs and wash his feet. But if we say the clock didn't start until he was finished peeing, then he actually has until 10:02 the next day. Some of you are probably thinking, well, 2 minutes, it doesn't really matter. What's the big deal? Why even bother with this level of detail? Well, the reason why we bother with this level of detail is because there are many things that cause minor Hadeeth to come onto one's body not just urinating. Some of the things that cause minor hadith to come onto your body might take a long time, like sleeping. If a person goes to sleep and he sleeps for 8 hours, did his clock start when he first fell asleep, or did his clock start when he woke up? And you see that there can actually be a very significant difference depending on whether you start the clock at the beginning of the cause of hadith or whether you start the clock when the cause of hadith was completed. And, just to save you a lot of worry, I'll tell you that there are several opinions within the Shafi'i school about this, with some scholars who say that the clock starts at the beginning, and some scholars who say that the clock starts at the end. And the strongest opinion is actually that depending on which cause of hadith it is, some of them start at the beginning and some of them start at the end. For easiness sake for all of you, you can just take the easiest opinion of them all, which is that everything, in all cases, your clock starts at the end of the cause. So whichever of the four causes cause your minor hadith, whenever that cause is completed, that's when your clock starts. That's the easiest opinion, and it's strong enough for you to follow. So I'll just go with that one for easiness sake. So we talked about the conditions for the hoof to be valid. And we talked about the duration, how long a person can wipe on the hoofs, which will typically be 24 hours. But there's one special case where it will be 72 hours. The last thing we need to talk about when discussing the hoof is the amount of the three things that invalidate a hoof wipe. Okay, so let me explain how wiping on the hoofs works. If minor hadith comes onto your body, and as a result, you go to make wudu to lift the minor hadith, you're going to wash your face, your hands, your white part of your head. And what happens is, if you wipe on the hoof instead of washing your feet, you're just going to wipe with moist hands on top of the hoof, and then you can go make salat. That's called a hoof wipe. Like when you wipe on the hoof, that's called a hoof wipe. And that hoof wipe is sufficient for you to make a valid salat. But it's possible there are certain things that can invalidate your hoof wipe. So that if you do one of these three things, you cannot go make salat. Okay, you will have to wash your feet because wiping on the hoof simply won't work if one of these three things happens. What are the three things? It says, the hoof wipe is invalidated by any of the following three things. The end of the duration. So one of the things that invalidates a hoof wipe is if your time period ran out. If you had just 24 hours and your 24 hours ended, well then in that case, once your time ended, the hoof wipe, your most recent hoof wipe became invalid. You don't say, for example, oh, well, I wiped on my hoof when the time was in, and I haven't done anything to bring minor hadith on my body again, so I can still pray, I can still make salat. No. The fact that you wiped on your hoof instead of washing your feet while the time period was in means that when the time period is over, you must take those hoofs off and you must wash your feet, or else you cannot make salat. MashaAllah. Someone asked, if the person goes to sleep with wudu and they die in their sleep, does that mean they died with wudu? Yes, that is what it means. Second thing that invalidates a hoof wipe. If you remove one of the hoofs, so once you put these hoofs on, we said you can't put them on until you're in a complete state of purification. But if you have that complete state of purification and you put the hoofs on, okay, if you have the state of complete purification and you put the hoofs on, then once you cause minor hadith to come onto your body, your clock starts. And from that point, you can wipe as many times as you need to on those hoofs until your time runs out. But the condition is that you never take the hoofs off. Because if you take a hoof off, then your hoof wipes are invalidated. You will have to wash your feet again before you can put that hoof back on. Okay, and I'll tell you that when we say removing a hoof invalidates the hoof wipe, it doesn't matter if you removed it intentionally or not. Okay, so if you were just walking and your hoof got caught on something, and as you were walking, it just got pulled off your foot, well then your hoof wiping is invalidated. Or if it fell apart, like say your hoof just tore, it tore apart, and it no longer meets the 5 conditions of a valid hoof, well then that's as if you removed it. Okay, these cases are the same thing as removing it. And the third thing that invalidates a hoof wipe is whatever causes major hadith. So any of the things that cause major hadith also invalidate a hoof wipe. You will have to remove the hoof and wash your feet as part of a complete ghusl before you will be able to make a valid salat. I'm going to stop now and take questions about wiping on hoofs. The main thing I want everyone to understand here is that gym socks and dress socks are not valid hoofs. Here in the United States, you will see many people just wiping on socks. Don't be like them. Okay, this is not valid according to the Shafi'i school. And in some cases, there may be a saying from another school that permits it, but if you don't know which school permits it, and you don't know all of the conditions and integrals and invalidators according to that school, then don't just wipe on your socks. Okay, do something that you know will be valid. So if you're learning the Shafi'i school, then follow what the Shafi'i judgment is. Okay, if you wear boots, most types of boots count as a valid hoof. Okay, so if you wear boots, you can wear them to work, wear them in the office, wear them at school. And when it comes time to make wudu, you can just wipe on top of the boot and pray wearing your boots. Okay, that's fine. This is something that's very kind of a sensitive topic. Some people, depending on their circumstances at work, some of them are very shy to make wudu at work. Many people are afraid that they're going to get caught with their foot in the sink. They don't want anyone to see them washing their foot in the sink. If your job situation at work is such that you're afraid of that, then wear boots. And when you make wudu, then you don't need to put your foot in the sink. You can just wipe on top of the boots. But you're going to need to pray while still wearing them, because remember, you can't remove the hoofs. So yeah, it's good because no one will see you put your foot in the sink, but also it's good because your wudu will be a lot faster. Some people at their jobs, they're not given a break to make salat. They have to kind of sneak off. So, anything you can do to make your wudu go faster, such as wiping on hoofs, is something that will cause you to be able to go make wudu and make salat in less time. So these are things that can help a person if you're in one of those tough situations, mashallah. So yes, this question, does it mean if a person goes to sleep with wudu and dies in their sleep, they died with wudu? Yes, that is what it means. If you remove the hoof, make wudu, then put hoofs on again, does that restart the clock? I don't want to say yes to this question, because if you take your hoof off and then you make a full wudu by washing your feet and you put on the hoofs again, well, then your clock actually did not restart yet. Your clock won't start over until you do something that causes minor hadith to come on you. That's when the clock will restart. How big a hole could be in your leather socks to make it invalid? Well, any hole will make it invalid unless it's there for the purpose of allowing the laces to go through it. If the hole is just there for the sake of the laces, then it's excused. But any hole will cause it to not be valid. Now, again, when I say any hole, I mean if the hole is big enough that water could get through it, then it would be large enough to make your hoof not be valid. I mean, you got me thinking now about some microscopic hole that you can't even see with the naked eye. We're not talking about holes that small. We're talking about something that would typically be considered a hole, like you can see it with your eye, that there's a hole in it. Okay. And if water can get through that hole, then the hoof is not valid. If you're wiping on the boots, then that means the boot is the hoof. So the boots need to stay on. You need to have the boots on while you wipe, and you need to have the boots on while you make salat. Because if you take the boots off, then your hoof wipe is no longer valid. And it means you have to go wash your feet in order to make salat. So no, if you're going to be wearing boots, then just wear them for the whole 24 hours or however long you need to wear them. And know that whenever you take them off, you're going to have to wash your feet. Oh, mashallah, asking a tough question. Okay. I might need to review this one. But if a person has, there's a lot of cases here. So first off, let's just assume that the sock you're talking about is like a gym sock or something that doesn't count as a hoof in and of itself. So if you're wearing a hoof and you put a gym sock on top of your hoof, and again, we're talking about a gym sock that does not itself qualify as a hoof, well then yes, you can do that. But if you're wiping on top of the gym sock, it will only be valid if the moisture from your wipe reached the actual hoof. Okay, because if your hand is just merely moist and you wipe on the gym sock and none of that moisture touches the hoof, then you didn't wipe on it. Okay, but if you use so much water that the water went through your sock and still touched the hoof, then yes, in that case, it will be valid. What about the case where you wear another pair of socks under your hoofs? Well, again, assuming that these socks do not in and of themselves qualify as a hoof, then yes, you can just wipe on top of the hoof and you're fine. The next part of the question, can you perform a valid wipe on the hoof and then after that, just put a pair of tube socks over top of the hoofs? Then yes, in that case, it's fine. But the next time you need to wipe on your hoofs, it's going to go back to what I said earlier. You either remove the tube sock and wipe on the hoof directly, or you can leave the tube sock on top, but you need to wipe in such a way that the moisture of your wipe still reaches the hoof beneath the sock. Someone said, is it valid to perform wudu with hoof on, then change your mind and remove them and perform salat? Okay. There's cases for all of these things. So let's take I'm going to assume you're asking about someone who actually has minor hadeeth on their body. So they make wudu, they lift the minor hadeeth from their face, their arms, and their head. And when it comes time for the feet, they decided to just wipe on the hoofs because the conditions were met. If this person afterwards changes his mind and takes off his hoofs, this person cannot make a valid salat. This person will have to wash their feet up to and including the ankles before they can make a valid salat. Okay, inshallah, that's clear. But it's also possible that a person might, remember, you need to be in a state of full purification in order to put the hoof on in the first place. So it's possible that a person might make wudu by washing their feet and then put the hoofs on, and then minor hadeeth still did not come on their body yet. Okay, say an hour later, they haven't done anything to bring minor hadeeth on their body, and they might decide, you know what, I don't want to wear the hoofs, and they might take the hoofs off. And then, yes, they could go make salat. Because in this case, there's no minor hadeeth on the person, right? The hoofs were like clothing in this case. They made a full wudu and they haven't broken it. Okay. What if you travel 100 miles and on your return travel takes you through your hometown, but your final destination is past your hometown, a traveling distance. Okay, so while you're in your hometown, you're not a traveler. So if you were traveling, say you know, from Boston to Philadelphia, and say your hometown is New York City. So you're going to pass through New York City on your way to Philadelphia. And each leg is a shortening distance, I believe. I believe Philly's far enough away. So this is the situation you're talking about. I don't know if it's 100 miles or whatever, but in this case, you're saying the person travels a long distance to get to his hometown. And when he arrives in his hometown, he will cease to be a traveler, because a person cannot be a traveler while in his hometown. And by hometown, I mean the town he's an inhabitant of. And this is something that, inshallah, will get more clear once we start talking about Jumu'ah. But a person, no matter where they are on the earth, they're either an inhabitant of that spot, or a resident in that spot, or a traveler in that place. Okay, they're either an inhabitant, a resident, or a traveler. Okay, you're an inhabitant if that's your hometown. It's a place you don't intend to ever leave unless you have a need to leave it. Every other place, you're either going to be a resident in it or a traveler in it, depending on how long you intend to stay there. So if you intend to stay there 4 whole days or longer, then you're a resident there. Otherwise, you're a traveler passing through. Now, if your hometown, when you say hometown, if you mean the place you inhabit, then you cannot be a traveler there. So as soon as you arrive in town, you're an inhabitant. You cannot shorten your prayers. You cannot combine your prayers. And because of the status change, assuming you already wiped on your hoof while you were traveling before you got to this hometown, then your duration would become 24 hours. Now, once you leave the town, because your ultimate destination is still a long distance on the other side, then this is starting a new travel. So if you took your hoof off and washed your feet while you were in that town, and you didn't wipe on the hoof until after you started your new travel, then you would have 72 hours again. MashaAllah. If you're ever in this situation, my advice to you is don't go into your hometown. Go around it. If you're going from Boston to Philadelphia, don't take the George Washington Bridge. Take that other one, Tappan Zee or whatever. And go. If New York is your hometown, go around New York. MashaAllah. What's next? Can you use heavy knitted wool socks? So the way you answer that question is by looking through the 5 conditions that are mentioned in the book. Okay, if these heavy wool knitted socks are made of a pure material and don't have any contamination from najis filth, and if they cover everything they need to cover, and if when you drip water on them, the water does not reach what's beneath the sock, and if they're strong enough that you could walk around outside in the dirt and sticks and rocks and everything for like 30 minutes without damaging the socks, and if you were in a state of complete purity when you put them on, then if all of those conditions are met, then yes, you can wipe on them. If any one of those conditions are not met, then no, you cannot wipe on them. Okay, these are things that you're going to have to sort of answer yourself. I can't see the socks, so I don't know how strong they are. I don't know if they would hold up to 30 minutes of walking. I don't know if they would prevent water from going through or not, but these are things that you can test. Go wear them outside for 30 minutes, see what they look like. And don't just walk on smooth surfaces, walk on the actual earth, ground, rocks, sticks, things like that. Okay, well, alhamdulillah. So we'll stop here, inshallah. The next section is about ghusl. It's not very long, but inshallah, we'll delay it for next week. someone asked, just to be clear, you accidentally remove hoofs, which invalidate the wudu. Okay, so I'm going to just be a bit more clear. If the hoof comes off, it doesn't invalidate wudu. It invalidates the hoof wipe. Okay, it doesn't invalidate wudu, it invalidates the hoof wipe. So, for example, if I made wudu, I washed my face and lifted minor hadith from my face. I washed my hands and lifted minor hadith from my hands. I wiped my head and lifted minor hadith from my head. I washed my feet and lifted minor hadith from my feet. And then I put on hoofs. Later, I go to the bathroom. Minor hadith comes on me again. So this time when I make wudu, I wash my face and I lift minor hadith from my face. I wash my hands and I lift minor hadith from my hands. I wipe my head and I lift minor hadith from my head. But instead of washing my feet, what do? I wipe on the hoof. In this situation, the minor hadith is still on my foot. The minor hadith is still on my foot. It's not lifted. Okay, but the hoof wipe has the judgment of making it permissible for me to make salat. So if that hoof accidentally comes off, the hoof wipe is invalidated, meaning the fact that I wiped on my hoof before, it no longer has the effect that I can make a salat while I have minor hadith on my feet. That impact, the effect of wiping on the hoof is canceled out. So now I'm just like any old person who is in the middle of his wudu, a person who removed minor hadith from his face, hands, and head, but has not yet removed it from his feet. When this hoof comes off, it does not mean I have to go back and I have to start my wudu over. I literally just have to have the proper intention and I just need to wash my feet. That's all I have to wash, because that's the only part of me that has minor hadith. What's the rest of the question? It says, and you want to renew wudu. All right, it says, you accidentally remove hoofs, which invalidate wudu. And we just said it actually only invalidates the hoof wipe. It says, and you want to renew wudu with hoofs. So you took the hoof off. So if you put the hoof back on, you won't be allowed to wipe on it, because the condition of the hoof is that you have complete purification when you put them on. So if you took a hoof off, even if it's by mistake, you're going to have to wash your feet before you put the hoofs back on again. But once you put the hoofs back on again, then they're like a regular hoof. Okay, if you want to make wudu to lift hadith, you can wipe on the hoofs. If you want to make a wudu just to renew it, even though you don't have hadith, you can still wipe on the hoofs. And in this case, because you washed your feet and entered a state of complete purification, when you do put the hoofs back on, your clock will restart once you cause minor hadith after the time that you put on your hoof. But no, you can't just like take a hoof off and put it back on and act like taking it off didn't have any effect. Taking it off cancels your hoof wipe. You have to wash your feet after that. Okay. Barakallahu feekum. Any more questions? Going once, going twice. Normally I go over time, so this will be my first time finishing in like an hour. So I have another minute if someone has a question. All right. Well, in that case, let's say La ilaha illallah before we go. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you for attending. And as always, I do ask that you study these classes. This one in particular has a lot of details. So you're going to want to look at your notes or watch the video again, inshallah, so that you can remember all of this stuff. Other than that, I'll see you next week at the same time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.